Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar presented by Suzanne Bontempo from Our Water, Our World. My name is Andrea, and I am here on behalf of the Fairfield-Suisun Sewer District and the Solana Stormwater Alliance. And I will be helping facilitate the discussion today and the technical aspects where Zoom allows us to be very cool and collected. We will be talking about eco-pest management for spring pests, and I hope you like this presentation. Suzanne.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited that everyone can be here. Just working out my own technical hiccups. All right. So we are going to go through slides for just a little under an hour. As I've mentioned before, I always have a lot of content I like to pack into our time together. And then at the end, we'll leave time for your questions. So please enter your questions in the Q&A. I'm not sure if the chat is open. If it is, you can also add comments there. We are going to, well, what we're going to learn is that I'm going to provide a brief intro to the OWOW program and what IPM is, though from the poll, it seems like most of you are familiar, so it will be a review. Then I'm going to dive a little bit into pests and prevention, what that looks like. And then I will offer management tips for common spring pests such as weeds, mushrooms, peach leaf curl, slugs, snails, earwigs, aphids, whiteflies, spider mites, beetles and weevils, mosquitoes, yellow jackets, voles, moles, gophers, and rats in the garden. That seems like a lot, but believe me, it's not as overwhelming as it might sound. And then I'm going to offer tips for when we need to use pesticides and some additional resources. All right, so the Our Water, Our World program is a national award-winning program. As of 2022, we are now statewide, which is very exciting. We partner with water pollution prevention agencies and retail stores, retailers that sell pesticides. And we provide pest management education through the lens of IPM to the public and to the retailers that sell the pesticides, all with the intention of guiding folks to an alternative to the more toxic pesticides to solve their pest problems. And just to review, I like to start by sharing what the watersheds, our gardens, and water quality have in common. How are they related? Well, a watershed, as you might know, is an area of land that drains or sheds the water into a single body of water. Watersheds drain any rainwater or snowmelt that isn't absorbed into the ground into the nearest stream, creek, river, that then can flow to a lake, a bay, a reservoir, or the ocean. Our properties and around city streets, parking lots, all of the water that isn't absorbed into the ground will run off into a local storm drain and go untreated to the nearest waterway, taking with it chemicals, pet waste, motor oil, debris, fertilizers, any residuals from pesticides or fertilizers, whatever else is out there in the environment. So the Our Water, Our World program is designed to draw that connection between pollutants and water quality. So similar to a watershed, our property is going to, when water moves across our property, those pollutants, anything that we're using around our yards or our gardens, any of those residuals can possibly be a pollutant. And if it is, it can end up that easily draining straight into that storm drain, or if we're in unincorporated areas, into the culvert and then to a local creek or waterway. So we just want to try to look at alternatives that we can use that won't cause a water toxicity or be a pollutant to our waterways. And one solution is by employing integrated pest management techniques. And integrated pest management is a decision-making process that uses science-based strategies. It allows us to look at the garden as a whole. And then from there, when we see a problem, we start to ask a number of questions. So first, what is the problem at hand? Oftentimes what we see are symptoms of a problem. And then from there, once we can properly identify what's going on, what that problem is, we want to identify what is our threshold of tolerance. What's our threshold of tolerance versus the plant's threshold of tolerance? Because oftentimes our threshold is much smaller. Plants are designed to really actually adapt and really handle some chewing by pests, which isn't a problem. But if it's too extreme, then yes, that would be a good time to take some action. With IPM, identification is key, prevention is second. And then from there, if we need to take action, the action steps in IPM are called controls, cultural controls, which is increasing the health of the garden. Mechanical controls are the tools that we use to manage that pest. Biological controls are inviting living organisms in, such as beneficial insects, to manage that pest. And then chemical controls we would use as a last resort when we've exercised all the other controls, all the other steps. We're always going to choose eco-friendly pesticides, and we're going to use them very minimally. All right, so as I shared, proper identification is key. We want to identify that pest, understand the life cycle of that pest. We want to understand that pest habitat and the timing. So right now, we're still kind of cold, but we do get a couple of warm days in between the cold days, and we're starting to see some aphids. So that's normal. You know, aphids are going to show up every spring once the temperatures get warm. So we're expecting them, right? But then we also want to understand if there's any natural enemies of that pest, who they are and if they're present. So I have a picture of here of two caterpillars. We always like to ask, you know, is this a pest or a pal? Caterpillar's sole purpose after they've hatched is to start chewing leaves and to eat a lot of plant material in the form of leaves. They just chew leaves for their entire phase of being a caterpillar. Monarch caterpillar on the left, we all know is a prized, beautiful butterfly that we want to support and encourage. Whereas the caterpillar on the right, the white-lined sphinx caterpillar, which is also a very important pollinator, it will transition into the white-lined sphinx moth or hummingbird moth you might be familiar with. That caterpillar is in the same family as a tomato hornworm, which also transitions into a hummingbird moth. That might look more like a pest to some, but they're both important pollinators. So a couple lookalikes that we'll just breeze through. We have a cucumber beetle, which is a common garden pest, and a mildew-eating lady beetle. They both are very similar in size and shape and color. The color here on these photos maybe isn't the best, but out in the garden, they could look very similar. This guy's a bad bug. This guy's a good bug. All right, pest or pal. We have the damsel bug, preys on a wide variety of small insects. And we have a leaf-footed bug, which is a pest for tomatoes and pomegranates. They do look very similar in the garden. This is a good bug. This is a bad bug. So pest ID isn't always so easy. And have you ever noticed that certain pests are on one plant and not others? This is something that's really important to notice in your garden if you haven't already. Many pests are host specific. So in this case of this rosebud that is inundated with aphids, it's so gross. I loved seeing this. I couldn't help myself but take a photo. This rose was in a it was in a parking lot of a big shopping center, and of course was very stressed. So of course it is going to be inundated with aphids. Hopefully your plants don't look this extreme, but if they do, we want to really look at other things that's going on in the garden because the plant could be stressed. And we can also see that there's lack of beneficial predators that are not feeding on these aphids. We want to grow a healthy garden ecology. So some pests are seasonal and expected, as of aphids. I just mentioned we're already starting to see a little bit of them. Their activity is only going to grow as the seasons warm. And as the season warms, we're going to see other pests out there as well. But we're also going to see an abundance of beneficial insects. So pests are food for the beneficials, which helps keep that healthy balance. We need to reevaluate our thresholds of tolerance, because when I see some aphids, I get really excited because that means I'm going to have beneficial insects arriving soon. And going out for a sundown beneficial insect hunt is a lot of fun. An infestation, as I mentioned, of an infestation of a pest, as I mentioned, can also be a clue that something's not working and that the plant is stressed. So it's really an invitation to look a little deeper to see, is the irrigation broken? Is the plant not draining well? Things like that. Plant selection for garden health is also a big deal. We always want to plant the right plant in the right place. And we want to do our homework. It's really easy to go to the garden center and get excited about a plant and just buy it on a whim. But it is important to match those plants to the condition of our garden to keep them from being stressed and susceptible to pest problems. We want to match the mature size of the plant to the space available. We want to avoid over pruning and overcrowding. So if we have a space in our garden that's really 3 feet wide, we want to make sure the plant we're buying is going to grow at the maximum height of really 2.5 feet. 3 feet would be pushing it, because we want to make sure there's always going to be air circulation and we're not overcrowding. We want to group plants to the plant needs once established. So we want to make sure we're planting all the full sun plants that want regular water together. We want to plant all the part sun plants that want little to no water once established together, and so forth. That's what that means. And we want to plant correctly. We're going to invite our garden allies. Though we might not always recognize them, we want to understand how important they are and the key role they play in the health of our garden. So we want to consider inviting the 3 Ps. So the pollinators, such as our bees, to fertilize flowers, which increase productivity of our food and flower crops. We want to invite the predators, such as ladybugs, that consume insects as food, reducing the populations of our bad bugs. And then we want to invite the parasites, or the parasitoids. These are insects such as the parasitic wasps that use the host pest as a nursery for their young. It's really crazy, but it's really fun. To support the good insects or beneficial insects in our garden, we want to provide them with food. So though we associate them with eating garden pests, they also require pollen and nectar from flowers. So it's always a great idea to plant a variety of flowers that grow in small clusters, such as sweet alyssum or yarrow or ceanothus, or flowers that look like a daisy or a sunflower, such as a cosmos, erigeron, and gaillardia. We want to provide healthy garden maintenance, which means removing any food crops from last season. If we still have those apples and persimmons and pears hanging on the trees or in the ground around our garden, please clean those up. We want to clean them up because first, they could be harboring insects that overwintered. And they also can attract pests like rats, yellow jackets, and other critters. So it's just a good idea just to clean everything up. We want to dispose of diseased leaves and branches. We want to place them in our green waste bin and get them off site. We don't want to keep them on our home compost systems. We want to remove any leaves and debris that might be at the crown of plants, including mulch, because after stormy winter and all these rains and winds, it's not unusual that leaves and mulch can build up around the crown of the plants, and we always want to make sure the crown of the plant has a lot of airflow and nice circulation. We want to prune or selectively prune plants according to those plant needs and the plant type. We're going to check irrigation systems for leaks, breaks, or plugged emitters, and plug sprinklers once we start to turn the irrigation on. It's amazing we haven't had to turn it on yet. We're going to monitor for pest activity, and we're going to address any pest or irrigation problems as we see them. This is really important. All right, so now we're going to discuss the eco-pest management for spring. So we're going to keep weeds in check. We're going to see a lot of weeds because we've had a lot of rains. We're going to hand pull them when they first emerge, or we're going to use weeding tools such as a garden hoe to work these weeds and remove them at first sight when the soil is dry. It's not a good idea to ever go out and work in the garden when the soil is wet, because we're just going to compact that soil. When those weeds get to be too tall, which I've already experienced, the good option is to mow or trim them with a line trimmer, or even get some grazing animals out there if you're in those areas of the county. But by all means, do not let them go to seed. That is the number one. We're going to see a lot more mushrooms because we've had such a rainy winter. When you see mushrooms in the garden, this is not always a bad thing. They help break down nutrients to feed our plants. Often they're a sign of a healthy garden environment, and they commonly appear after the rains or when there's frequent irrigation, or sometimes an irrigation break. So they can be an indicator because they thrive in the moist soils. Mushrooms are the fruiting bodies of the underground network of mycelium, which is really cool. But careful handling and proper identification is important when making the decision about removing mushrooms in the garden. So in my experience, most of the garden mushrooms are, just neutral. I can just pick them up and put them in my green waste bin. But sometimes especially if they're in the vicinity of a tree, they could be telling me a story. So it is always important to properly identify them. They are short-lived and will disappear quickly on their own. But it is nice to kind of know who's out there in the garden, because it helps. They help tell a story. Peach leaf curl. So peach leaf curl, we're going to see a lot of this also. Peach leaf curl is a fungus that only affects peaches and nectarines. Okay, I'm going to repeat that. Peach leaf curl only affects peaches and nectarines. It's not on any other plants. Leaves are going to appear puckered or curled, sometimes resembling aphid damage. Leaves will take on a yellowish color, turning orange and red before drying brown and falling off. Peach leaf curl starts to develop when the temperatures have reached 50 degrees, and it thrives in cool, moist, early spring weather. Affected leaves are going to fall off if not removed. So it's really important that we pick these leaves up, or just hand pull the leaves off of our peach trees and nectarines and dispose of them properly. If they are on the ground and we happen to get another rain, or we happen to do some overhead watering, the spores of that fungus are going to splash back up onto the plant and further the cycle. So prevention is the only treatment as a dormant application of copper fungicide during the winter months before bud break. It's the only thing you can do. So what can you do now? So during the growing season, because I believe all of our trees have are into bud break, if not flower. During the growing season, we want to increase the health of the trees. And we do this by top dressing those root zones with compost, a nice inch or two of compost, with a nice inch or two of mulch on top. And this is at the drip line. So at the outer edges of the plant, starting about 6 inches from the trunk and then out. We're going to feed with organic fertilizers. And one of my favorite things to do is to apply a liquid seaweed or liquid sea kelp as a foliar spray. So I'll mix it up. Instead of my watering can, I'll put it in my sprayer, spray the leaves. And the reason why seaweed or kelp is so amazing is that it's a cell growth stimulator, and it bolsters the health of those cells. So really increasing the health of the plant so it can actually fight against that fungus, fight against the disease, so it can stay healthy. We can also apply compost tea as a foliar spray. It's not always easy to find, and we always want to make sure we're irrigating correctly. That means watering deeply and out at that drip line and letting that soil dry out between watering on established plants. Okay, we're going to see a lot more slugs, snails, and earwigs. You're probably already seeing them. We're going to work with traps. So for all three of these pests, we can use a snail board, or we can get snail and slug traps and earwig traps at our local garden centers and hardware stores. We can use exclusion tactics, such as using that copper tape barrier. They won't cross it because they'll get an electric shock, or chunky bark mulch, which we can make a perimeter or band around plants that are commonly visited by slugs and snails. We can use eco baits such as iron phosphate for slugs and snails, or iron phosphate with spinosad for slugs, snails, earwigs, and more. However, during the rainy season, and it's very moist out there, these baits will just dissolve. So it's really best to wait till areas dry up before we use them. Aphids. Aphids appear in the spring, warm weather. The females are pregnant at birth. Okay, this is like crazy science fiction stuff. They are going to increase when we use synthetic fertilizers. That's going to actually attract them, because synthetic fertilizers actually stimulate a lot of new growth, and the aphids really love feasting on the sugary juices in that new growth. Also, when we're doing a lot of excessive pruning, we're going to attract aphids and other pests, because excessive pruning is also going to stimulate new growth. When we see ants, ants are actually protecting these insects because they're farming their honeydew, the honeydew secretions that they create, they're actually farming it. So if you see a trail of ants going up a plum tree or a butylon or similar, that's usually an indicator that there is aphids or some other pests, scale whiteflies in that area that is going to that the ants are farming. And then aphids are going to increase when there's lack of predators. So we're going to thrive, whiteflies, similar to aphids, okay? Whiteflies are going to thrive in warmer conditions. So actually when things warm up a little bit more. So typically after the aphids, or aphids are first, whiteflies come second. But these are, aphids appear also when there is, or they can be a sign of overwatering and poor drainage. So if you see if we see whiteflies on plants that are in containers, have a check and make sure that those containers are actually draining well, okay? Or if there's an area of the garden where we see whiteflies, make sure we're not overwatering or that there's not an irrigation break, because sometimes that is a clue. But whiteflies also appear when we're using those synthetic fertilizers, when we're over pruning plants, and when there is a lack of predators. So what are the solutions for aphids and whiteflies? We want to plant more biodiversity of flowering plants to attract those beneficial insects. We want to feed with organic fertilizers. We want to adjust the irrigation as plants grow. We're going to use sticky traps to monitor, to see the activities. We want to wipe those pests off or syringe them with a spray bottle of water. Hold on, please. Sorry. We're going to wipe off those aphids or whiteflies, the nymphs, or spray them off with a spray of water. We can apply eco-friendly pesticides. We're going to use narrow spectrum pesticides first, like insecticidal soap. We can also use oils such as our horticultural oils, our neem, and organicide. But starting with insecticidal soap first is a great way to start. Spider mites. Spider mites are going to show that there's poor air circulation. They're also going to show up when we're feeding with synthetic fertilizers, or they're going to increase when we're using broad spectrum pesticides. And this can include neem and other eco-friendly broad spectrum pesticides. And a funny thing that I've recently learned is that spider mites like to live in like tight little colonies. And when we've used a pesticide, if we're not able to, I guess, coat them all at once to really knock them back, they will disperse, spreading throughout the plant, trying to get away from that pesticide. And then they start new colonies in other areas of the plant. So it almost seems like the pesticide is exacerbating the pest, making it worse, which it kind of is. So pesticides aren't always the best go-to for spider mites. We really also see spider mites increase with lack of predators, and they're really common on a lot of plants. So if we're familiar with what plants they're common to, then we can monitor. So like a lot of house plants will commonly get spider mites, buddleias, tomatoes. I mean, there's a whole list. So if we're kind of aware of what we have, or if we've had spider mites in the past, it'll help us prevent moving forward. So some solutions: we're going to irrigate properly. We're going to increase the air circulation. We're going to monitor for the spider mites. We're going to syringe off or spray off the spider mites when we first start to see them. In fact, just increasing the humidity some, maybe washing them off every once in a while will definitely help, because they thrive in those dry, dusty conditions. We're going to invite those beneficial insects. We're going to plant more flowering plants so that we can really attract the beneficial insects, and we're going to feed with organic fertilizers. If we need to use a pesticide, I'd really encourage you to start with something narrow spectrum, such as insecticidal soap, but I can share that by practicing the other options that I've mentioned, you're going to reduce or eliminate spider mites before even having to go for a pesticide. Cucumber beetles. Cucumber beetles are not in the ladybug family, though they are mistaken as. In fact, sometimes people will call them man bugs instead of ladybugs, which is kind of funny. They do overwinter as adults and as larvae. They will feed on a wide variety of plants, so they are not host specific. They will go out and feed on a lot of different types of plants. The larvae will feed on plant roots and live in the soil until they emerge as an adult, and they really like the moist conditions. So what a solution is going to be, we water in the morning, those sunrise hours, so that the areas can dry out by sundown. We're going to mow weedy areas to reduce their populations. Also, when we can mow those areas, we're reducing moisture getting locked in. It actually can evaporate and dry out some more. We're going to apply beneficial nematodes to the soil in the early spring as the soil begins to warm. We're very close to that perfect timing for applying those beneficial nematodes, because the beneficial nematodes feed off of the larvae that is in that soil. We're going to rotate our annual food crops. This is really important. We're going to clean up plant debris to reduce the overwintering of the pests. And we're going to use cucumber beetle traps to monitor and reduce populations. My favorite way to manage cucumber beetles, in addition to applying the beneficial nematodes, is to just go around with a little cup of soapy water and knock them into that bucket of water. They actually, by default, when they see you coming, will drop. So of course, we're smarter than they are. So I put that bucket of water soapy water underneath where they are. And as I come, they drop right in on their own. We are going to use the same technique for other beetles around the garden, and weevils too. So when we see them, it's very easy just to hand remove, knock them in that bucket of water, or even vacuum them up with a shop vac. It sounds crazy, but that border plant bug that's pictured on the right, that's the adult and the larvae, top and bottom. Sometimes we see them in large clusters, large populations, like on a board or in sections of the garden. Super easy just to vacuum them up. Mosquitoes, male mosquitoes. The male mosquito is the pollinator, important plant pollinator in our garden, but the female is the one seeking the blood meal. She's the one that's biting us, which is the nuisance. Both the eggs and larvae are aquatic and can live in a single teaspoon of water. So some solutions: it's really important to get out into our gardens around our property and look for standing water. And we want to drain that water. And it's not necessarily just in the garden. It can be in the gutters. It can be around our potting shed, any saucers that might have some water from the winter. There's a lot of areas that we're seeing water on our properties. So we're going to see an increase in mosquitoes this year. So we want to secure rain barrel lids to prevent them from getting in there, because that's another place they like to breed. We can use a narrow spectrum larvicide containing BTI, which is Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis. We use these in the form of mosquito dunks, mosquito bits, and so forth. These are excellent to use in ponds and water features, livestock troughs, rain barrels, rain catchment systems. They are very narrow spectrum, and they are only going to be toxic to or a pest management solution for the larvae of the mosquitoes and some flies, and they'll have a list on that label. We are going to place screens in the windows and doors. We're going to wear protective clothing when we're outside to prevent getting bitten. And we can use eco-friendly mosquito repellents that can offer temporary relief, which is really great. Many free pest management services are offered locally throughout our county. So check out your local county mosquito and vector control agency to see what services they offer. Yellow jackets, similar to mosquitoes, are going to, well, what we want to do is place those yellow jacket traps out very soon. As soon as things start to warm up, that first nice warm weekend, I think it's around the corner. So it's usually that first nice warm weekend in March, we'll put the yellow jacket traps out. And the reason why are the queens, which look like supersized yellow jackets, are the only one from the colony that overwinters. You might see them out underneath the cover of the barbecue grill or down patio umbrella or on the cover of patio furniture. It's not unusual for me to crank up my patio umbrella on the first sunny day, and I'm in there cranking and I notice 4 yellow jacket queens inside the umbrella, which freaks me out. They're hibernating, so we know they're not going to just immediately wake up and sting me. So I have some time, but when we can put the yellow jacket trap out now, when that queen emerges from her dormant state, she's going to look for a new place to create a nest. And when we've captured her in that yellow jacket trap, we've prevented thousands of yellow jackets from taking hold into our property. But again, similar to the mosquitoes, we can reach out to our local vector control. Many of our local vector control agencies will remove any ground nest that might occur through the summer months at no charge. All right, voles, moles, and gophers. Proper identification is important with these critters, okay? They all do something different, but they all can be a pest at some time. Voles, they are very cute, but they have very clean holes that go into their burrow. So it's a very clean hole as pictured here. They create surface runways. So if you've all of a sudden mowed an area and you see all these runways, that was because of vole activity. They do like to chew the bark off of trees and shrubs and girdle them, so they can be quite problematic. Solutions, we're going to mow those grassy areas to prevent runways. We want to really expose them. They know their prey. So when we can expose the areas, we're going to see less activity. And the best way to manage them is to use an unbaited mousetrap placed in their runway. I know this sounds crazy, but it's very effective. Here are some pictures of different ways we can use it. The middle is right at their hole where they're going to come out. They're either going to go left or right. So we've got a trap on either side. And then in runways on the property, we can just put that trap in the line of their runway and whammo. Moles. Moles create mounds just like a volcano. It is very clean mound that really does look just like a volcano. And they tunnel shallow. So their tunneling systems are just below the ground. So that's why we can literally see their tunneling system kind of 3-dimensional raised in our garden areas and our lawn areas. They eat soil dwelling insects. So to prevent moles, let's remove their food source. We apply beneficial nematodes to feed on the insects that the moles eat. When there are no more insects for the moles to eat, we will not see mole activity. Gophers. Gophers create crescent-shaped mounds. They fan out the soil as they're digging out of their tunnel. They are tunneling much deeper, usually around 6 or 8 inches, and they have a very extensive burrowing system. Some sections of their burrows drop down about 3 feet. Very intelligent animals. They eat plant parts, the roots, the stems, the leaves, and the fruits of plants. Yes, that is a picture of my prize-winning butternut squash that they decided to enjoy one day. Very upsetting. So how do we prevent the gophers? We prevent access to their food. So we're going to plant all of our plants into gopher baskets. Gopher baskets are made out of galvanized wire or stainless steel wire. We're also going to line raised beds with 1/2-inch hardware cloth or gopher wire that we can purchase. And if we do have vining plant parts, we can make a skirt around those raised beds or around the garden beds with that 1/2-inch hardware cloth or the proper gopher wire. Gopher wire is not poultry wire. The holes are smaller, so please do not use poultry wire thinking that will work, because the gophers actually can fit through it. And there are repellents that are effective on the market. However, they are intended to be used as temporary deterrents. These do not solve the problem. Okay, these are temporary deterrents. They work very well. They are effective. They must be used in accordance to the label. So we have to apply them. They all have very special ways that they need to be applied. So we need to follow the application that's listed. And again, remember, this is just a temporary deterrent. Okay, rat management in the garden. We're going to remove the places of harborage. So if we've got the wood pile or the pile of bricks, or we've got that ivy, the bank of ivy, or any other area that is maybe a passive compost system, we really want to understand, and we oftentimes know exactly where those rats are living, and we want to dismantle that area. We want to contain chicken coops and compost areas. We really want to make them Fort Knox. We want to make sure that the rodents cannot get into our compost systems or our chicken coops. We also want to make sure we keep the lids on our garbage cans and make sure the garbage cans are secured. We want to remove pet food availability. We have to avoid just leaving that pet food out all day for our pets and other critters. We want to rethink our bird feeders because we're really just feeding the rodents. And we really want to prevent access to any of their food sources, either by removing them or excluding them. So we exclude them by working with barriers of 1/2-inch, pardon me, I misspoke, 1/4-inch hardware cloth or similar, because they can fit through 1/2-inch. So we want to make little exclusion frames of 1/4-inch hardware cloth to prevent the rodents from eating our food crops or getting into our chicken coops, our compost, or any other areas. All right, pesticide usage. Understand that even though we might all only be using eco-friendly pesticides, all pesticides are designed to kill things, eco-friendly or not. So when we use pesticides don't necessarily solve the pest problem. They kill the pests, but oftentimes they will kill the beneficial insects too. And if we're not addressing the cause or really the problem, the pesticides only offer a brief respite and the pest will most likely come back. So this is something to really keep in mind. When we use pesticides, we're always going to use them as a last resort. We're going to always choose less toxic and eco-friendly. We are always applying in accordance to the label. If that pest is not on the label, that product's not going to work for that pest. We're always going to wear our PPE because even products like insecticidal soap or neem can cause a dermal reaction to our skin. We want to understand the unintended consequences and risks of using the product. Tips for using pesticides. Look at this long list. There's a lot to consider when we're using pesticides, okay? So we want to know our pest and only target that pest. We want to understand the life cycle and apply the pesticide during the best time of managing that pest. So is it the best time to manage the pest when it's in its larval stage, or when it's in its adult stage, or when it's in its dormant stage, and so forth? We want to understand the active ingredient of the pesticide, and we really want to understand its mode of action, how it's intended to work. Is it a contact kill, or is it intended to be ingested by that insect? We want to spot treat. We want to target only the pest. We're not spraying down the whole garden. We're applying pesticides at sundown, which is the best time to apply because our beneficial insects and our pollinators are less likely to be active, and the pesticides, eco-friendlies, once they're dry, there's not going to have any residuals that'll be toxic. And then by morning, sunrise, pollinators, beneficial insects can cruise around that area without being impacted by the pesticide. Or pets or children will not be impacted by the pesticide. We want to avoid applying plants when they're in full bloom, just because then our pollinators can still come visit before that pesticide is dried and be impacted by it. We don't want to apply pesticides when temperatures are higher than 85. We don't want to apply pesticides when plants are water stressed. And we don't want to apply pesticides when there is a breeze more than 5 miles an hour, or when there's rain, heat, frost in the forecast. Okay, so those are all really important. And if we're releasing beneficial insects, or we want to attract beneficial insects to our garden, give them time to find the pests before applying those pesticides. A couple pests I'd like to just briefly talk about before we close. Asian citrus psyllid has been in California since March 2012, so 11 years now. And it is a pest that we've all been the state of California has been closely monitoring. For me, I feel like it could be mistaken as aphids. They are smaller than aphids. They're very, very tiny. They could go really unnoticed. However, what is quite notable is their nymphs will secrete these white waxy kind of secretions like curlicue or curling ribbon. That's going to be quite notable. Like all of our other whitefly and aphid pests, they're going to be found at the tips, the new growth of the citrus, so that they can get their mouth parts easily into the leaf to access those sugary juices. So we just want to monitor our citrus. It's a good idea to monitor on a regular basis. If you live in Central or Northern California, where the psyllids are rare, if you see them, you want to act fast and call the CDFA hotline immediately. It's very important. Phone number is here, 1-800-491-1899 to report the psyllid. You can also get more information on the CDFA website, as well as California Pest and Disease Prevention Program. Spotted lanternfly is not in California yet, and we really want to keep it that way. Spotted lanternfly is now in, I believe it's 11 states throughout the United States, and it is a very invasive pest that feeds on many host plants. Okay, their range of feeding includes grapes, hops, apples, stone fruits, maples, poplars, walnuts, and willows. All the things we have here in California. So we're doing our best to prevent this pest from making it into California. Early detection is critical to prevent the economic and ecological losses that this pest will bring. So if you ever see this pest, report any spotted lanternfly finds to the CDFA at that same phone number, and you can get more information at the CDFA website. All right, more online resources. Our Water Our World has a nice library of fact sheets that you can reference for easy to understand pest management solutions. And then the University of California statewide IPM program has this incredible database of pests and pest management and wildlife identification and weed identification, and so many great resources. So please check that out. For pest identification, bugguide.net is my go-to. If you're not familiar with this website, check it out. It's so fun. It's really cool. And then if we have pesticides and we're curious to understand what that mode of action is or how they're intended to be used or how they work, the National Pesticide Information Center is a wonderful, very user-friendly website. For our past webinars, to view our recorded educational webinars, please visit the Fairfield-Suisun Sewer District. Their website, fssd.com/public outreach, is where our library of recorded educational webinars live. So please check that out. And I'd like to thank you for joining us. Let's finish with your questions. I do apologize for the interruption. I have 2 dogs. They're kind of still puppies. I gave them a chew. One of them got the chew stuck over there under the hutch, and that's why it was crying. Maybe you were hearing that. So sorry.
No, we didn't get to hear that, but thank you, Suzanne.